for the special board meeting called to order December 21st, 2023, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. And with that, we'll move to item 2, Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand if you wish. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll go to number 2. The purpose of this meeting is basically for going over the audit. We'll go to item 3, motion to approve the agenda. There's one change. Underneath item 6B, that's going to be taken off the list. With that, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move.
Support.
Moved by Director Polter, supported by Director Duarte. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. With that, we'll move to item 4, motion to approve the consent agenda.
Support.
Moved by Director Polter, supported by Director Egan. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. With that, we'll go to item 5, presentation, Sterling County fiscal year 2023. We'll turn that over to Alex, and if he wants to introduce.
Yep, so Bonnie from Sterling Company is here, and Rick, can you hear me? I just want to make sure before we get into it.
Yes, I can. Good morning, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Yep, Bonnie Sterling is here, and we have a few slides we're gonna go over, and you just tell me when you want me to flip to the next one, so.
Sounds good. Thank you. My name is Bonnie Sterl. I'm one of the partners with Sterl & Company that conducted the audit for the school district. And I first want to thank Alex and his staff and everybody in the district for putting up with us for about 3.5 months as we're on site and getting information. So again, thank you for the due diligence with that. I do have, you should have received a couple things in front of you. There's a pick-bound report that's almost 80 pages. I did put together some slides that will highlight a few things in the book. I will, during the presentation and in reference to some of the slides, give a page number, so if you want to make a mark on your slide copies that you have and where it is in the book, so we can kind of go back and forth. So the first one, Alex, if you want to switch to the next slide. So the first one is actually the table of contents, and I always think it's important when you get an almost 80-page report to kind of say what's in this report. There's 7 broad areas that are in here. We'll talk about the independent auditor's report. We'll talk about RSI, or required supplemental information, which is management's discussion and analysis. There's the basic financial statements within this bound report. And within those basic financial statements, there's 2 perspectives. There's a district-wide perspective, where the financial report of the district is on the full accrual. And there's a fund-based statement, which is a modified accrual in accordance with UFARS, the Uniform Financial Accounting Reporting System that school districts are required to use. There's notes to the financial statements. Then afterwards, we get into additional RSI, OPEB. We've talked about that OPEB liability for years. We'll touch base on that. Net pension liability, or NPL, that's the district's proportionate share in regards to TRA and PARA. We'll talk and touch bases a little bit there. There's some supplementary information combining an individual fund. There's a UFARS compliance table within that section. And then the last part are the single audit yellow book reports that are required for school districts and the Minnesota legal compliance report. So I think it's important. You'll see this table of contents in your bound report, and it'll kind of give you perspective of the different areas we're going to talk about today. So the first one is the independent auditor's report. That'll be found on pages 1 through 3. And I'm pleased to announce, and you can certainly go in your book, and I'm pleased to announce that the district received an unmodified opinion, or what we call a clean opinion. So what that means is that it's our opinion that these financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. The report is 3 pages, And it does talk about what are the management or district's responsibilities for these financial statements and what are the auditor's responsibilities. We go to the next slide. That's your management discussion and analysis. This is a required supplemental information. It's found on pages 4 through 16. Now, this is management's ability to put in narrative form what has happened in the district. It's the one area where there's comparatives between the current fiscal year and the prior fiscal year. And it's the one area where the management can also talk about what are some plans or impacts for the future. So pages 4 through 16, it's required. It's considered unaudited. In other words, we read through it to make sure it agrees to the financial statements, but it is in a narrative form. Couple things within the RSI, if you want to just make a note that on page 12. That talks about the enrollment trends within the district. It'll show the last 20 years, what the enrollment trends have been. For FY23, the district did experience a loss of 13 students, and you can see where the trend has been over the last 20 years. So that might be of interest when you look at that. On the following page, page 13, you'll see the other trend that might be of interest is what has happened to the district's general fund unassigned, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, fund balance. And that did see a significant decrease in FY23 of about a little over $2 million.
Do we talk now, or do we
Yep,
wait
no,
till the end?
anytime you want to bring in a point.
What was the cause of that?
The decrease in the unassigned
In the general
general fund.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that when we get to
Oh,
some of
you
the
will,
spreadsheets.
okay.
Yep.
So for me, and we talked about this at our finance meeting last week, but for me, the thing to be aware of, don't want to cause alarm, but aware of, and I think we have really good things happening moving forward, but you know, back in 1920, we had 94 days of operating expenses in our fund balance. So if the bottom fell out, we could keep going for 94 days. Fast forward a few years, today we're down to 45 days. That's like a month and a half. So I think that's important to just be aware of.
And we'll see in perspective when we get into the general fund what has happened as far as in terms of revenues versus expenditures to account for that. You know, and this is the unassigned balance, so there are some, you know, we'll talk about what makes up your general fund balance, and your general fund balance has restricted funds, has some committed funds, those type of things we'll talk about. So this is the unassigned portion of it. And then we'll start, if you go to the next one, we're going to start getting into the basic financial statements. And the first one are the district-wide. Now, I just have a couple slides on the district-wide. Those can be found on pages 17 and 18. The district-wide was a format that came out, it's been about 10 years now, where they were looking and having school districts look on the full accrual. In other words, very close to what a commercial entity would be. There's a recording of your total assets, your buildings, all your facilities get booked as an asset with depreciation, and all your liabilities get factored into this. We've talked about in the past, you can see, let's just stop on total assets and deferred outflows in your district-wide was a little 82.5 million. That includes, and you'll see that on page 17, that includes cash, investments, receivables, your buildings, all of those type of things are assets. Your liabilities are on the other side of the equation. We're at 93.5 million. Now this liability section we've talked over the last few years also includes, you'll see on the bottom of that slide, that there's an OPEB liability of 32.9 billion. That's determined from your actuarial study that's being done. That's the commitment that you've made to current employees for post-employment benefits. And then the net pension liability of 22.2 million. So you can see part of that total liability are those two aspects. So that left your net position, again on the government-wide, of a deficit of about 11 million. Now that's made up of investment in capital assets of 23 million, restricted for state mandates of 7.6. In other words, that restricted for state mandates are things that, dollars that are restricted, not available for general operations. So it's things like your debt service or specific program dollars that haven't been spent, which left an unrestricted of 41.7 million. And
On this statement, the total, our retirement liability, and I'm really not looking at the district portion of the TRA, PRA, because I'm gonna just have
Yeah.
confidence in,
Yeah.
in the government.
yeah, yeah.
But what's controlled by, like, us is about 34 million, if I understand
Right,
it correct.
exactly.
It's the OPEB
OPEB,
and the severance.
yes.
And as I look at the trend, like this year, and I know it's determined by an actuarial, but it decreased.
Right. One of the things, and there's a slide, I think later on where we kind of highlight that, but you can definitely see that your OPEB liability decreased by about 10 million from the year before. Now, some of that is going to be, your actuaries decide that. You send it in, some of that's based on discount rates that they use, actuarial assumptions, all of those demographics, all of that type of stuff factors into it. So your OPEB liability actually decreased from about 41 million back in FY22 to 32.8 million.
That used to be, oh,
Yeah.
We're,
that was like $100 million.
And I was
Yeah.
wondering is, at one point, there was a change in retirement benefits to new employees starting.
yes.
Right.
So does this factor in, are we
Yes.
starting to see some of the benefits of
Yes,
that?
yes, absolutely. That's what you're starting to see, is some of that change, And as retirees, as people drop off of that, all of that changes and assumptions change, all of that does. So you will see, we're going to talk about the committed fund that the district has done for that, and how that now is about 11.4% of your OPEB funding, just because your OPEB liability dropped. Now, in relation to that, the net pension liability, that's the TRA and PRA, and we've talked about that in the past, that is, you're required to pick up your proportionate share, and I've got a later slide on that. That is something that the district can't control. You pay into TRA and PRA based on the prescribed formulas that are there. But you're still required under this reporting model to pick up your proportionate share. And that also is determined by actuaries and audited statements put out by TRA and PRA. So we're just picking up those numbers from those statements. So that does include, in that 93.5 million, those type of liabilities. So Kim's comment was that 32.9 million in OPEB, and then there's about 1.2 million in severance. That's the estimated, for those that are eligible to retire right now or anticipated to retire shortly, that would be the estimated liability the district would have, and that would be 1.2. So she's adding those together and saying really the district's control for that is about 34.5 million. So this government-wide perspective this district-wide perspective is important to note, because there are some of these liabilities that are down there, but some of that is outside of what you can control. So if you go to the next slide, again, we're just going to touch on one more thing with this district-wide before we kind of get into the fires. This will give you, again, on the district-wide, and that can be found on page 18. This perspective starts with your expenditures, and the district ended up with about 40.3 million in total expenditures. Total revenue was 38.2, so you ended up with a change in a net position on the government-wide of a deficit of 2.1. Now that, ironically, don't get that mixed up with ironically, that's about the same amount that your unassigned fund balance went down.
Yeah.
They really don't have a direct correlation because there's other things that factor into it, but this one ended up dropping about 2.1. Now, if you look at FY22, last year when I was here doing this presentation, our district-wide, we had a $7 million positive. Well, it's because of the swing between what happens on TRA and PERA out of your control. And the other thing, back in FY22, the district had $2 million more in federal funding of your COVID dollars that you used back then than you did in FY23. So again, this government-wide perspective, or this district-wide, does have some impact that is out of the control of the district. Primarily what happens, and TRA and PERA saw some huge swings, again, because they have changes in actuarial assumptions, investment earnings, demographics on their end of it also. So that's the government-wide or district-wide. And I think the takeaway that Kim probably has highlighted from that perspective is that you have about 30, the OPEB and the severance liabilities that are out there looming that you do have control over how you manage those. Okay? Any questions on that one? Otherwise, we're going to go into the fund-based statements. Now, the fund-based statements are on a shorter, it's called a modified accrual method. In other words, it's under a shorter period of time, generally 60 to 90 days after year end, if there's expenditures that related to the prior fiscal year. Capital outlay is expensed off, your debt service is expensed off. Those are things in accordance with UFARS, the Uniform Financial Accounting Reporting System, which school districts are required to follow. So within your fund-based statement, we're going to talk about the general fund first. The general fund is your main operating fund for the district. That's where most of your educational costs will come into. And we actually, I show up here where your fund balance is as of June 30th of 2023. So you had a total fund balance of $8.6 million. Now, this is under the fund base. Remember when we just got done talking about the district-wide and we had that deficit? Remember that incorporated TRA and PERA and OPEB? These statements do not. These statements are on a shorter term, the fund base. It's under pay-as-you-go. In other words, your OPEB, your cost for your retirees, and your health insurance are expensed off in the current year. We're not recognizing that total liability. This is what's required under school district finance. So you can see you did have a positive overall general fund balance in your general fund, as of June 30th. But of that fund balance, it's really made up of multiple parts. And when I talk to my clients, I always say, somebody gave this example, and I always thought it was a good example. Think of it in terms of an onion. Your fund balance is an onion. We're going to start peeling out layers of the onion until we get to the core. So you look at that fund balance, the first one we're going to take off is restricted. In your general fund, you had $291,485 of restricted dollars. There is a footnote later on, we'll touch base, that'll describe what made up that $291,000. Those are dollars that are received in from the state, most often the state, specific finance codes, specific sources. If the district doesn't expend them, they're carried over and they're restricted. The next one is committed, so we take the next layer out. That is $3.7 million. That is committed by the board. The board several years ago, even pre-OPEB, there was a requirement in UFARS to set aside some severance and the recognition of some of these benefits coming down. Then when OPEB came out, UFARS did away with that, but this school district at that particular time was proactive and said, hey, we're going to take those previously restricted funds under UFARS, and we're now going to commit them, and that's done at the board level. The commitment is at the board level, and saying we're going to commit those dollars to help fund OPEB or to help, continuing health care coverage, those type of things for the retirees. Over the years, about 2 or 3 years ago, the board also then committed a respective earnings for it. So this did grow by a couple $100,000 because of interest earnings. The district did much better in FY23. Interest rates went up. So the proportionate share was allocated to this committed fund. So right now, that committed fund, we talked about that OPEB liability on the previous screens, that committed is about 11.4% of your OPEB. Now, there's no requirement to fund OPEB. There's no requirement that you had to fund it. Some districts went out and bonded for it, created a trust and did that. Majority of districts did not, and you continue to do it as you pay as you go. So that committed fund is set aside. Now those dollars are committed by the board. So if the board decides to do, to uncommit them, it would require board actions to do it and approval to do it. But that's the reason those funds are sitting there.
Is that one we gave, like a certain number of thousands of dollars we said every year was gonna go to OPEB? That's what this is?
Right,
We didn't pass that. We passed the provision saying that the interest that's earned on these committed funds would be added back to the committed
Oh, is that
fund
what we did?
balance.
Right,
We didn't pass the other pieces of it.
Oh,
And Bonnie, just if I could add something, that we, as a finance committee, we met last week and we talked about uncommitting it or moving it, and we decided this isn't the time. So that'll remain committed until next year's statements.
okay.
and that would be require, just to clarify that, what Kim was saying, the policy approved a year or two ago was, I think it was a couple years ago, was that the district would commit additional interest earnings on those funds.
Oh, that's what
Yeah.
you said, okay. I didn't know it was interesting.
Yeah, so you'll see back in FY '22, there actually wasn't anything additional to it because the investments weren't quite as strong, so there wasn't an allocation, actually.
But
it was
this
a
year
little bit
there
less.
is.
Yes.
So that's good.
For FY '22, or '23, excuse me. So then that's that committed, and yes, you have that flexibility to change that uncommitted, move it into assigned, whatever, that's at the board level. The assigned, there's a small.
Bonnie, can I add to that for just a second? I have one comment. I just want to clarify also that account, there's no outflow from that account, correct? We're not coding any expense to that account. That account is gaining interest, right? But the principal remains, and there is no in and out with this fund.
Right. It's actually, it's a fund balance portion, but you do have those funds as part of your investment portfolio, but that's sitting in in an investment portfolio. So, right, Rick, there's no dollars that have come out of that in the past, because in order for that to occur, the board would have.
Board action.
Board action, correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the next section is assigned. There's a small portion of assigned of 53,000. What assigned is, it's that next layer of that onion which says, it's not restricted by the state, it's not committed by the board, but it's more of a management tracking. And where this assigned came out was a couple years ago, when student activity funds had to be moved into a separate, there was changes with that. The district created what we call Fund 31, which were really student activities, but they were under board control. So a lot of that might have been activities at the elementary schools, things like that. The Fund 31, those are assigned. The one thing you'll notice when we get into the management letter, our recommendation is some of those assigned balances that are sitting there, really those activity that has been going into Fund 31, even though it's combined to the general fund for the financial reporting purposes, really should not be in Fund 31 anymore. They should go through Fund 1. So that's more of just a management type thing. So those assigned balances in there are primarily what's sitting in there is what's sitting in from the athletic department when they do their, they have the golf outing, they do some things like that. Those type of things are sitting in Fund 31. And there's a spreadsheet tracking every, who are those funds kind of attached to. So that's what that assigned is.
So I have to go back to your other comment. So are you saying like the dormant student activity funds, those are the ones that should be maybe reclassed into Fund 1?
Yeah, this assigned is not anything to do with those. It's kind of they're not the student activity funds because those are taxed separately in a separate fund. These are ones that were old, many years ago. It's kind of like Washington School had, a thing when they took their pictures, their things, and they were tracking that, and the athletic department and things like that. So it's really general fund activity that's just been carved out in a separate fund by the school district. So really that
And
assigned,
what's that fund called?
it's Fund 31.
Okay, what's Fund 1?
Fund 1 is your general fund.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so when we get into some of the technical part of UFARs, there's several funds that go into it and get reported as in your general fund. That assigned of 53,000 is Fund 31. It's set, in other words, it's an internal tracking of certain activities within the school district that really are just tracked for internal purposes. There's no legal restriction to do so. Management just does track that.
There are funds sitting, and I don't know if I'm getting this, funds sitting in 31 that could be moved over to Fund 1.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. So you're just saying we should clean it up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
we
just,
should
yeah,
clean it up.
yeah, exactly.
So we
Yeah.
should do something with that 53,000.
Yeah, well, no,
Different,
it's
or-
just from Alex's side of it, he would be looking and, closing out potentially Fund 31 and
Okay.
using Fund 1 as the
Right.
coding. It wouldn't change any other activities, it wouldn't change any revenues or expenditures. It's just taking
Make
it
it
out
simpler.
and simply, correct, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's exactly what it is. And then the unassigned of 4.5 million, that is the change, you'll see a decrease on the next couple slides we get into. You'll see an overall change in that fund balance by $1,990,000 or almost $2 million. To give you the perspective, the change back in FY '22 for your general fund, again for the whole fund balance, was a decrease of about $1 million. So that just shows you the last couple of years what that trend has been in that general fund. I do want to point out that you still met, the district does have a policy that says you want to maintain at least an 8% minimum unassigned fund balance. That's 8% of your next year's budget. So you clearly met that. You're not in violation of your own policy. And then the budgeted, I also wanted to point out that the district had originally budgeted a $1.5 million deficit. There's a page 23 in your book. And your actual deficit ended up being about 1.99. So there's about a $500,000 difference in that. The other point too to note is part of the discussion is that COVID-19 or your pandemic funds amounted to $2 million in FY '23. So without those dollars, because those dollars are used to continue operations, keep things going, we would have experienced a higher unassigned or fund balance difference.
Well,
Is
it's
that COVID, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
that COVID money, is that gone then?
Yes, I think it's the last of it. There's a
Uh,
couple bucks left.
It's not completely gone, there's a few dollars left for our learning loss, which is gonna cover our social workers, interventionists for the current year, but substantially, yes, it is gone. And when we met as a finance committee last week, we talked about, and I don't know if you have this, I think you have it in here, Bonnie, about the money moving in from the internal service fund.
We'll talk about that, yes.
So we'll get to that, but yes, the COVID money is essentially gone.
To
You
me,
can't,
oh,
go ahead.
no, go.
You can't really say that because the COVID funds are gone, that we would have automatically had another 2 million in debt.
Under the-
Because we hired a lot of people
Yeah.
with the COVID funds that we wouldn't have even hired.
Right.
So you can't really,
Right, but the idea is with that is because the COVID dollars were there to help continue operations, get you back into the classroom, continue with the
well,
whole
yeah,
thing.
but we
But
did
it-
hire people.
But I think the landscape to look at is, post-COVID, the last 2 or 3 years in school district finance have been unique in the fact there have been significant additional dollars coming in to help fund current
Oh, yeah,
operations.
yeah.
Those are not going to
Well,
continue.
right, yeah.
And I think for me, those COVID dollars, I feel like at one of the last meetings where we talked about test scores and we talked about the way the district has performed, being able to hire those people, the interventionists, the social, that's huge. It's proved to be, pay back dividends multiple times, so I'm fortunate that we've been able to hire those people, but for me, as I look at the modified accrual statements, I flip back to page 13, and I remember sitting around this table back in 17, 18, when we look at that general unrestricted fund balance, going from 9 million to 4.5. And as we talked last week, I think the way the stars are aligning, there's some really good things going on in our district. So if we didn't have the administrative team, the principals, the leadership, finance, I might be sitting here feeling different, but I think there's a good plan in place. But I think it's important to look at page 13, because I remember having conversations around this table saying, oh, look at that, 9 million, like spend it, right?
Yeah,
And this just demonstrates how quickly things can change, so. I
yeah,
think
but
that's-
spent on good things, like you said,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but,
So,
That is one of the unique things that we
we
saw.
didn't blow it. I mean, we
No.
spent it on
Yeah.
really good things.
no, but once it's gone,
It's just the sustainability of these programs.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was the key. The funds that came down with COVID were key and very instrumental for school districts to continue operations. And the thing is, it was sustainability. It was being able to look at, identify, yes, add the interventions, all that. But there was a large piece of these federal funds that were unique in the fact that they were very broad as far as what you can use them for. And they allowed each district to utilize them what you felt was the best way to do it. We don't always see that. Sometimes there's grants and funding out there, but it's so specific on where you can plug it that it doesn't really help. These funds helped overall general operations. And so what this district did when you approved, looked at what it was, the district looked at the money that was available under some of those COVID dollars and directly supported on a percentage basis to each of the districts some of the overall salaries and benefits for the district.
And we knew going into this that was going to come back and be an issue
Yeah.
in the coming years,
Yeah.
and we're there now.
well, and you know what else makes me a little bit nervous, and I don't say nervous, but I think we need to be aware of. I don't know if anybody saw the paper today, but there's an article in there about free lunches, right? Like, I think that's having a huge positive impact in our district, and it's filling a very much it's a necessary need, I guess. But it looks like the state underestimated what the cost of that program was going to be. So now, like as a district, it's doing good things in our district.
You want to keep it going.
We just need to be aware, because what's the state going to do? Is it going to be one of those unfunded mandates again?
Yeah. Because you're right, that's, we'll touch base a little bit on that food service, and maybe we'll come back, circle
Yeah.
around to that comment about the changes that are in place for the food service. Let's just wrap up the little bit on the general fund still. So what I did was I put together, sometimes pie charts and visual can be helpful, and then this shows that for the general fund, now we're talking the general fund, your operational side fund, your total sources for FY23 were 34.9 million. Okay, and this can actually be found on page 21. If you're looking in your financial statements, you'll see in that first column under the general fund. But I think it's important for the district to realize, where does that $34 million come from? And you can see the vast majority, 24.1%, or about 69% of that funding comes from your state sources. General education, different sort of state programs that come through. Federal was at 3.2 million, which for this year ended up being about 10% of the funding. Outside of the COVID dollars, of that 3 million, and if we peel off 2 million that were COVID or pandemic, the remaining bulk of your federal funding, the larger programs that you have in the district are your title programs, your special ed programs, and your student, your food and nutrition programs. Those are the big three that you typically have that make up the other part of the federal funding.
Title, food, and what was the
Title, special education.
Special ed.
And special education is funded both by federal and state sources, so there's a portion. And there's a schedule in this financial report that will show exactly where did all those federal dollars come from, and we'll touch base on that in a minute. Your local taxes were 5.9, now that's 17% of it. That makes not only just the individual property taxes, that's the portion that comes from the county, pays a portion of that. And then other at 1.6. Your other costs are, your other revenues are coming in are gifts, your investment earnings. Those are like athletic fees, they're those type of things that are coming in. So you can see the vast majority of your state, of your revenue sources does come from the state. You go to the next slide, this gives you a visual of where did your expenditures, and I have functional, I probably should have said program area, that's the more technical term. Your FY23 has 36.9 million in expenditures. So previous slide showed 34.8 or 9 on revenues. This is showing 36.9 of expenditures. That's that $2 million reduction we saw in your general fund balance. You'll see the vast majority is spent on instruction, which is your regular instruction, your vocational, and your special education. So that's, generally that comes to about 60, I didn't add that on there, but it comes to about 61% is spent. The rest of them you'll see is district support, instructional support. There's a little bit, I just want to point the very right-hand side where it says debt service is $757,000. That's the debt service in your general fund. That's your iPads and things like, the district has purchased those iPads and finance those over generally 3 years or 5 years. That's that debt service on that portion. That's not the debt service for your buildings or anything. We'll get to that in a minute. Capital outlay of a little over $1 million, that's that second one coming in. Again, that is not, you're going to see a separate slide where we talked about the Cheever Field and your early childhood building that was set up. That capital outlay are your technical things you purchase. If there was, other type of equipment, that type of thing within the general fund. So that kind of gives you a visual of where those dollars were spent. Again, you can find that back on page 21. And in your supplemental information in the back end of your statements, there's all kinds of detail that will even pull those different sections into how much was spent on salaries and benefits versus purchase services, all of that. So this is just a recap on total general fund expenditures. So the next slide, so that was your general fund. So the district, that's where the bulk of your operations occur, but the district also has other funds. You have the building construction fund, and this can be found on page 21. The building construction fund had a fund balance at the end of the year of $46,320. Now that's restricted. And generally the biggest part that fund really saw, $2.6 million in capital outlay, was for the completion of your early childhood center and your Cheever Field. Those were the major outputs that were there. The remaining building construction is $46,000, again restricted for any other capital projects that are going through that. Your debt service fund, you can also see this on page 21. Now this is the debt service fund, had a fund balance at the end of June 30th of $6.8 million. Again, restricted. Now the reason why this one is building in your debt service is because you have a one-time principal payment of $7.5 million that will be due in 2026 regarding your 2010 GO facility bonds. That's just the way that bond worked, that you're paying interest on it and then you have the one time, but during the year, you're over the course of that bond term, you are accumulating funds so that when you do have it, to pay it off when it comes due. So again, that is restricted. It's not like you can take those dollars and transfer to the general fund. Those are specifically for that. Your annual debt service payment for FY23 was $757,631, which is covered with local levy and state funding dollars. We'll see, I'll refer to a footnote here shortly where you can kind of see what's going to be the trend for those debt service payments in the next few years.
Bonnie, could you or Alex just talk briefly about, I know you're getting to it, but I think it's important. Alex shared with our finance committee that this will be dropping off. And, we're talking about potentially going to the voters to see that.
Yeah, so, this debt obviously matures and that'll be that much less of a payment each year. Correct, Bonnie?
Right.
And we were just talking with the finance committee about just some ideas about how to keep taxes level rather than having a big drop off.
Right.
In 2026.
Yep, and that would be, there's a footnote that when we look at, and I'll just refer to page 38, that'll show what are your debt service payments coming, and that's exactly right. That'll drop off in that year. That potentially would be an avenue to look at. Do you then go back and get some other funding at that particular source? The important thing about this one is just to look at that fund and know that $6.8 million that's restricted there is to cover that one-time huge payment that's gonna come in that particular year. So it's not like when Alex is getting ready to do the levy for that year, you're gonna have an extra 7.5 million he's gotta come up with. That's not the case. Over the years, you've been, you know,
Yep.
saving for it.
And we work with our investors and moving things and, you know, if you look at the monthly investment reports, that's included in there. And it's all scheduled to be 7.5 million at the time of maturity, so.
And when is it?
In-
January.
Yeah, it's in 2026, right, yeah.
I apologize, I've got rural internet here and I go in and out of your meeting, I apologize. But Alice, did you talk about how that will drop off and we will see a decrease in the levy and we might want to adjust for that in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's what we were talking about, that, you know, our taxes from the schools portion will go down if we don't do anything. But that's where we met with the finance committee and talked about maybe doing something to keep taxes level
Yeah.
going forward.
Yes.
So it's not that we want to
Okay.
go to the voters to
Right.
increase their taxes, we want just a continuation of what we currently have.
Yes, yeah.
And then if you go to the next slide, a couple other funds the district has is a couple others. Now they're considered non-major, not because we don't think they're very important. It's just financially, when we're doing the audit report and giving opinions, there's certain criteria, and so they're just smaller funds. You do have the food service fund, which had a fund balance of $468,000 at the end of the year. That again is also restricted. Now, one of the things on the food service, and there's detail, there's, you know, a supplementary information there that kind of explains all the stuff on the food service, but the one thing on that one is the change, circling back to what Kim was referring to earlier with that food service fund, even though now going forward there's free lunches, that is being subsidized. The difference before, when you would do your meal counts, it would be subsidized from federal and state sources, and then the parents and families would pay the remaining amount. It's going to be now subsidized through a state program. So it's not an unfunded mandate at this particular time. But it is that, as Kim referred, there was an article in the paper this year that the state is experiencing more usage, obviously, when that occurs. So your food service fund has the funds there and it's all restricted. The community service fund, which is your fund 4, also had a fund balance of $75,950. That also is restricted dollars. Now the other fund, and that's what Alex had referred to earlier, is the proprietary fund or an internal service fund. So this district several years ago, when you were self-funded, would have created this Fund 20, we call it, or fund, there's a proprietary fund, internal service. And that was where the health insurance cost, dental would be funded into there and paid out of that. Over the years, that has accumulated a fund balance of $2.9 million. Now that is one of the things for FY24 that were in the plans, and it's in your management, put it into their management discussion analysis, is that looking at the plans of closing that fund, transferring, using, I think, about $1 million committed, or utilizing $1 million to help fund the employees' health insurance costs for this next year, and then the remaining amount would go in to help your general fund unassigned balance so you could continue to do this. And so that would look at, you know, board action, close that fund, do those transfers over accordingly.
And you recommend we do that?
Yes, it was a discussion that we talked about. So the internal service fund, and let me just give you that number real quick. For the current year, generally the internal service fund, really it should just wash itself out. Money goes in, money goes out, but there's been investment earnings over the years, and early on when this was first created, the district was really self-funded for a portion of the health insurance. And so it was really important for the district to have those dollars available in case something came up. Costs of insurance were skyrocketing during those years. We were seeing, there were 20% increases in health insurance. But over the years, as the district has changed that, and really you're self-funded for the dental part, the other part you're into a plan, those dollars certainly can be transferred out onto the thing.
Well, and the 1 million, that was offered as part of contract negotiations.
And I was just gonna say that there was some concessions in health insurance
Right.
in our contract negotiations, and that was part of the whole package.
Yep.
But, so that's really a done
Mhm.
deal.
Done deal.
And-
Yep.
And we know that transfer is gonna be made into our unassigned fund balance in fiscal year '24.
Yeah, so you,
It just all happened before this audit was
yeah.
completed.
So that's a good thing, that's like bonus money for us, right? 1.9 million it'll be transferred, because,
Yeah, roughly,
yeah,
what they're gonna, I think we agreed to about $1 million going back to the employees to help
Yeah.
with their cost increases, and the rest is the
Yeah.
districts for their
yeah,
general fund costs of insurance.
yeah, so that's good.
But our health, I mean, like that wouldn't even cover our portion for, I don't know how many months, because it's a large number, and I don't remember it off the top, but that the district pays for health insurance each month.
Oh, right.
Yes.
So what are you saying won't help?
So basically, our part would be expended in the current year.
Very quickly in the current year.
Yeah, very
Prob-
quickly,
In the first half of the year,
Yeah.
probably.
the 1.9 million.
Oh, okay.
Any questions on that? So that's the funds that the district has. And then if you go to the next slide, you know, pages 27 through 52, there's a bulk of those, are footnotes. These are the additional backup and support, you know, great, interesting reading if you want to go through. But I did highlight a couple, like 4 of them that, you know, might be, note 5 we referred to before. If you look at note 5, that it talks about your long-term debt. Your total debt is 20.7 million, and it lays out what are your annual requirements for your debt service. You're required to disclose the next 5 years and then in 5-year increments after that. Note 6 is a very lengthy and technical footnote. It's on your TRA and PRA, but sometimes it might provide some background into why are you having to put that again on your district-wide. Note 7 is your OPEB. And then note 9 is your fund balance restrictions. And I think that one's an important one to look at. And I just wanted to the page number, page 51, I guess they had. That just goes to show, remember when we were talking about in the general fund that 8.6 million, and we were talking about 291,000, you'll see that number again. When this says, how was it restricted? Now, one of the things to look at is you do have, most of those are positive, but you will see a safe schools levy of a negative 801,000. What they allow you to do is, a lot of these can't go into the deficit. In other words, you can't overexpend your dollars coming in. There are certain ones that the state does allow you to overexpend. And you can overexpend up to future levy authorities. So that's showing that if the district so chooses, that in the future, there's some potential levy authority to make up for those. This school district over the last few years has spent dollars keeping your students safe. How do you keep it safe? You know, not only in physical, you know, modifications to security, those type of things. So you'll see that's the only unique one. You'll also see under other governmental funds, a deficit under your early childhood. That one too is allowed to go into a deficit, but obviously as you expanded your programs and do some of that stuff, you know, it might take a little bit to get that kind of right sized into things. But normally those restrictions are only allowed to go into the deficit under your requires. So that footnote might give you some additional information.
And as far as the early childhood goes, we talked about this, that we knew we were gonna spend money on our new facility and programming, but we also know that there's some funding coming in for pre-K.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we'll have to just keep,
Coming in when?
I think in the current year,
This school year?
I believe.
Alex, and just
Go ahead.
let me add, so the application is due, I believe, 1st of February. I think Kirk's in the room, but Kirk's aware, and we will be applying for future funds, and we will also be looking again to see if there's any remainder VPK dollars out there like we received last year. And we would sure be looking to receive those dollars too if possible.
And then the
Yep,
other thing
agreed.
that struck me was in footnote 7, I mean, just to highlight it, in the very last line, our OPEB pay-as-you-go this year was 1.8 million, so that came out of our Fund 1 for OPEB. And really, that's pretty flat with last year, so that was good.
Yep, Kim's referring to on the bottom of page 48 of your footnotes, it talks about what are the pay-as-you-go projections that were come out, and it was about 1.8 million is the district's estimated cost share for your OPEB. The next section is RSI, or required supplementary information. Some of this is required under UFARS and required under the MDE staff requirements for financial reporting, and some of it is supplementary. This section will give, and that'll kind of 53 through 68, again, quite a broad area for financial reports. The RSI, again, I'm just going to touch base on your OPEB. We really talked about this prior. FY23 liability was estimated at 32.9 million. Again, a drop of about, 10 million from the prior year. That's changed based on assumption of demographics, trends, concessions that are given in contracts like that was mentioned before. That's all determined by your actuarial firm to go through that. Again, reported in the district-wide set of statements, but in the fund-based statements, you experience that 1.8 million that Kim had just referred to as an expenditure. The net pension liability, there's also 10-year trends for both of these eventually. The standards require, eventually these will show a 10-year trend on it. So the net pension liability, again, TRA, the district's proportionate share was 17.6 million. Now your proportionate share, based on the entire state, was only 0.2202%. So when you think of how large that TRA liability is on their part, the standards say, hey, your proportionate share, and it's annually determined, ended up 17.6 million. So in other words, a lot of times people will say, well, I retired, you retire from the school district, but the funding for the retirement comes from either TRA or PRA. You're a multi-employer, it's a cost-sharing plan, and you're a participant in that plan. And so a few years ago, they said, hey, we should be having the districts visually recognize or be able to see what is your slice. So in other words, if something would happen, you're under pay-as-you-go, you're only required to pay in based on the proportionate share that comes in through payroll, but this is what they estimate the share to be. District's proportionate liability under para was 0.05765% or 4.5 million. And so there's some schedules that'll show where has it been over the last 10 years. Then you'll also see individual and combining fund statements within that part. It'll give more detail to roll up to what we had talked about on the higher level. There's budget reports in here that'll show what did you do for your general fund, your food service fund, your community service fund, budget to actual. And then the last part of that, there'll be what we call a UFARS fiscal compliance report that the district is required to report. Alex knows the deadline all too well, by November 30th. Everything needs to be submitted to MDE, and MDE matches, and then we're required as auditors to make sure that your report matches MDE, and this report goes into that. So there's this check and balance to make sure the districts are reporting what MDE has. Then the final section, actually I should have just put on page 69 in your report is what we call a CFA, or your Schedule of Financial Awards. I don't have that on the slide. That kind of just gives, or maybe, did I put that on the next slide? I did, Alex, yep. The CFA report, or Schedule of Expenditures, that's just will show you of the 4.1 million that you received in FY23, where were those sources? And again, 2 million of it came from COVID funds. You can see where the rest of it comes from, whether it's Title I or food service. So that kind of gives you an idea. Now the district, because you receive over $750,000 in federal funds, which this district has ever since I've been working with the district, you're required to have what's called a separate single audit, or an audit, a uniform guidance audit, which means we have specific compliance and testing that we do over those federal funds. And that's the next section. There are some compliance and internal control reports in there, again, unmodified, which means there were clean opinions. But there are 2 findings that have been traditional in this district, and they're traditional with every entity I do, because we work in greater Minnesota in small districts and small governments. there's a lack of segregation of duties. So when we come in to do an audit, there's always control deficiencies. And from an audit perspective, we have to look at, is it significant enough to warrant everybody's discussion? Which just means, yes, we're a small district, you have, one or two people doing your financial aspects, it's significant enough. The highest level is what we call a material weakness. If you get a material weakness, that means as auditors, we've said that those risks are so high that there's a high level of likelihood of errors occurring. This is at a significant, just means it's significant enough for discussion. That's going to occur because you don't have the budget to hire 74 people in your accounting office, because that's about what it would take to get everything,
Oh, yeah.
So, because in other words, we're saying somebody's going to collect cash, somebody's going to put the receipt in, somebody's going to, reconcile some of these related duties.
I'm with the Northeast Service Block also, and just about every one of the districts in there, we get this every year. so-
Yes, every year. And one of the things that I've been talking with Alex, MDE came out last year and kind of wanted, because this also goes over to the federal fundings and saying, hey, as federal fundings, we don't want to have this continual finding. The reality is, it's there, but how can you respond to it? So there's, an additional, I think I sent you some information on, a corrective action plan. It just means everybody needs to be aware of that situation. Ask questions, It really means bringing in, and this district does that, where you have, whether it's Nathan with his programs, or, different people with the administrators and directors in those programs, looking at their financial reports and saying, yes, this makes sense. It's those type of things. And then the second finding, again, the landscape has changed so much, and so we're also required to disclose that we assist in the preparation of the financial reports. Again, most auditors do assist with this sort of thing. It's fairly rare to have a client have somebody on staff to put this stuff together, but we're required to disclose that. So those are two common findings you've had in the past. Minnesota legal compliance, no additional findings. And so the last slide will just, the other communications that you have are two other required communications. They're just in letter form. The communication to those in charge of governance, it'll look exactly the same as what you had last year. It just is a general requirement. In other words, we talked to the board if all of a sudden the district had changed how they were doing things. The district, the only new implementation this last year was what we called SAVITAs, or subscription-based IT arrangements. It really did not have a material effect on this district. So there was no change in the financial reporting. We did disclose in there that, if there was communications on, any difficulties and things, we did disclose that, the audit sometimes got delayed because it is tough for Alex in his position to be, dealing with what he needs to on a day-to-day basis and having auditors require information. So we are required to disclose that. And then the second one is the management letter. Now, the management letter simply says that while we're doing this process, there are things that we just recommend the board consider and look at. Fund balance monitoring, and it sounds like you've really taken that, been proactive, have that. UFARS coding, that's been a thing we've talked about in this district in the past. That's critical because the UFARS coding dictates how you code something, may dictate whether you get some funding back. Is it in your policy spending restricted first or not? So UFARS coding, we've talked to Alex, that might involve some training on staff levels, on everybody else. So when they're coding an invoice, they're not just saying, well, this is what we used before, we'll just code it there. Really looking at, does this make sense?
So staff are putting those UFARS codes?
In some
Well,
takes,
then
yeah.
we need to train them.
In some cases,
Yeah.
those are coming, like building, secretaries might if they're
Yeah.
ordering stuff, or, and again, they're doing the best they can, and they
Of
said, well,
course.
here's where it was
Yeah.
before, we're gonna code it here. MD came down, and Alex worked hard, but they came down and said, no longer use $8.99, which was considered a miscellaneous expense. They said, let's claw it back, and so that meant looking at codes and getting them in there. It's critical, because you can see,
Yeah.
remember that slide sheet when I showed the program areas, whether it's instruction or if it's, admin or if it's anything, it's critical those codes get put into those
Yeah.
things because it dictates a lot of times where that funding is going to come from.
And I know our UFARS lead expert, Megan, Mrs. Megan. She she retired, I'm hoping that we've got
Well, and that might be more,
additional experts.
and that might be more Mars.
That
might
was
be
Mars.
Oh, she was March.
Oh, I
Yeah,
She was
yeah.
March, okay.
But just to follow up on what Bonnie's
Yeah.
saying is, she's already given me these recommendations, 3 months ago or 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And we've already started
Oh,
implementing
good.
some
Yeah,
of it, so.
yeah.
So hopefully, and maybe something we can talk about at a finance meeting is, you know, just maybe the oversight and
Yeah.
correction once requisitions get to the AP staff or something, but maybe we can,
That whole
That's
process,
important.
it is,
Yeah.
because if the coding is done accurately and timely at that level, by the time it gets into Alex's office and he's processing the stuff, it's there. Because he spends an enormous amount of time, and we as auditors spend an enormous amount of time looking back at those UFARS codes and proposing like, this maybe should have gone here, this maybe, and it really creates some additional, a lot of additional time at your end. So UFARS coding is really critical, whether it's capital outlay or whether it's, coding of supplies or things.
and not only like the time involved in making adjusting entries at year end, but I feel like it's also important because if we have a certain amount of funding that's in a particular area, we need to try to get it coded as correctly as we can, as timely as we can, so at year end, we know if we have funds to spend, we know if we don't want to overspend, so we need to make sure we're,
Absolutely.
Can the codes be changed at your end? Is that done a lot?
Yes, I mean, what happens is,
Correct the UFARs?
right, we make recommendations to
Okay.
say, well, particularly a lot of times it's spent in, capital outlay. You've got a policy here that says it's capitalized if it's 5,000 or more. So a lot of times we'll find in those, there's specific UFARS codes in a 500 section. A lot of the times we'll find things that are $40. Well, that
Oh.
clearly shouldn't be in there, that should be a supply.
Okay.
Or we might find things that are, those spend a lot of time with that little nitty gritty.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and I think to point out what Kim was saying, is the other thing about those timely reporting, especially when you get into programs that are funded with federal sources, if they were coded up front, you can do drawdowns on those. Now, you want to be careful you don't overdraw. But right now, the district, because of some of that stuff, will tend to, at the end of the year, wait until everything's done, get that and do one drawdown at the end of the year, so your receivables get quite high. So to manage with, and actually MDE a few years back said, hey, we really want you to at least draw down once or twice during the year and not wait until all the end of the year. The disadvantage with doing that is unless you've got your coding correct and everything into there and it's spot on, the last thing you want to do is overdraw.
Yeah.
So,
and you know what, and I just feel like we need to say too, our staff is doing a wonderful job. I feel like all the requirements have gotten more and more complex, so
it is.
it's really doing a lot more with the same staff.
We deal a lot with, I deal with cities, I deal with, commercial entities. There isn't any other industry than school districts that have such a complex financial reporting system. You have 17 digits. Everything that gets coded is 17 digits. It's fund, it's program, it's finance code, it's source code. Everything is so specifically tracked to generate, and how you code those can potentially generate additional revenue. So coding is critical, and it's too much for just one person in the district to have it all come through. So it's really, a shared responsibility from everybody that's there.
Bonnie, another question that came out of this management letter, the district's capitalization policy of $5,000. And I know it's kind of a double-edged sword. Is that kind of low?
It is for the size of this district. The reason why 5,000 makes sense to do it is it tails on your federal requirements.
Oh.
So it is low under that when you look at the size of your district, but it's kind of in target with where the rest of it is. So, we wouldn't necessarily say make a recommendation to change that. We're just making a recommendation when the coding is done and the budget process is done, that if things are under that those really are budgeted as supplies and not capital. And that also can help in future as the district's looking at what are your capital outlay needs in the next 2, 3, 5 years, if the coding is appropriate with that. We did tag in credit card usage again. We did see a little bit, and I know this comes from convenience, but one of the things that happens is whenever a credit card is being used, then certain authorized individuals have the authorization to do it, and I want to be clear, the expenditures were just fine. We're not challenging or saying anything about the expenditures, but anytime a credit card is used, you run the risk because it's charged prior to when the payment is approved onto the whole thing. And so we would recommend looking at those credit card usage and saying maybe some of that should not be put on the credit card, that it would run through your normal accounts payable, your normal approval process.
And Bonnie, for the board, I've already talked to some administrators about some of this, and we're gonna pull back on that. If it can go through our normal purchase order process, then it should, unless there's a reason that it can't. So.
Right, yeah. And this is really coming down, the credit card usage, is statutorily allowed. Debit card usage is not. So there's a clear difference, and this district doesn't use debit card charges. But there are some, the state auditor's really coming down and recommending, looking at those credit card usage and making sure that, are there things that can go through the normal payable cycle?
But I suppose if an administrator wants to buy something online, right?
Right,
Yeah,
there's,
things come up where
Then they have to
only
use the credit
accept
card,
the
right?
credit card,
Yeah.
Right.
and we understand that, but
Yeah.
just
But to
Looking
other
at-
things, yeah,
looking at the process, that if there's no other alternative,
yeah,
that's one thing, but
yeah.
if it can go through our PO process,
Yeah.
then it should.
So if it's a local vendor or something, yeah.
I think too, the less that we can use credit cards, the less opportunity for fraud that hits those cards. And
Yeah.
granted, we may not be responsible, but it's a lot of work and time, and we can avoid that.
and it does also protect the employee, because the statutes do say, even if an employee charges as an authorized charge and it's not approved by the board for whatever reason, it's the individual's responsibility to go back. So it kind of protects, I think, both parties onto that.
And I feel like, again, just so it's clear, like this topic, at least based on my context, is conversation in many industries and in other components of education. So again, I feel like maybe another conversation for a finance meeting is just an understanding of where we're using P cards, who has P cards, how many have P cards.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Bonnie, could I just add to that quickly? And just to put a little perspective to it, where I think where it gets most difficult is when we send staff members out of the district for any type of training, anything that happens overnight, any kind of travel. It's a lot of legwork on the front end, and sometimes it's just darn right impossible to get a check cut for that hotel, to get expense checks cut. So, we're reimbursing staff if they're not using a credit card, and sometimes those expenses, could be $500 to $1,000, and people don't want to put that on their own credit card or have that expense be reimbursed. So that's when we favor the credit card, but like Alex said, we're trying to pull back and control that.
And we're really not talking about those instances. Those are pretty common that something like that is done with the travel. It's just in FY23, there were a couple instances where it was put on credit card for, equipment or something like that, that really, might have been just a convenience type thing. Again, it was authorized, the whole thing. We're just saying in those particular cases, it would be recommended to go back through the normal cycle. So again, we're not saying discontinue credit card usage by any means, because it is there. It has its time and place, especially for travel reimbursements. It also has its time and place because if an employee goes out and purchases things on their own, they're subject to paying the sales tax onto it. If it's done through the district, there's an exemption. So there is a time and place for credit cards. We're just saying look at what the usage was.
And do we have an internal business office, from the business office, kind of developed credit card use policy? I mean, that might be something our finance committee can
That we should talk about.
talk about, because there are That would be good.
It's like Bonnie said, they're,
Just to say too, Alex, I mean, why don't you talk quickly about how many credit cards we have? Because I think that's a good picture to paint here.
there's three. I have one in my office. There's one in the activities department, one for community ed.
Oh, that's
Yep.
minimal.
But,
Oh, that's good.
but people come and use mine for
Oh, yeah.
things, and so, I mean, we can definitely tighten it up. And I think at our next finance meeting, maybe we can talk about, like you said, a policy on what is okay and what's not.
And that's certainly, this whole management letter of recommendations are exactly that. It's kind of like just getting some idea to kind of look at the whole thing. Food service receivables, I just want to touch base on that because we've talked the last couple of years, you do have a receivable sitting in your fund too. And this was prior, a lot of this stuff is really pre-2020, COVID type stuff. The likelihood of collection probably aren't quite high. How is the district going to handle that? If you've turned it over to collections and it comes in, then it goes into Fund 2. If the district makes a decision at that point that, however you're going to do and you're not going to get them collected, just to know that would require board action and the transfer has to come from the general fund to make that difference up. You can't just write it off in Fund 2 and Fund 2 absorb that sort of issue. And it's becoming more on the forefront for districts because now as free, the subsidized meals are coming, it's going to get harder and harder to collect some of these.
Rick and I have had discussions on this and we're aware of it.
Okay, yeah, and that's, there's no right or wrong. It's
Right.
just from an accounting standpoint, for UFAR standpoint, a certain action that the board would take at that particular time might require a transfer from the general fund to take
How much
care of
debt do we have?
I can tell you,
And Bonnie, can I just add too that we, this fall, we made extraordinary efforts to collect that debt. And then we did receive a portion of that back through that process, but we did, through food service, turn that over to collections here probably, Alex, was that around November 1st or mid-October?
October, I'd say, yep.
Yeah.
And I think,
I haven't heard if we've made any headway on that. Maybe you have, Alex.
I know there was some collection for sure. I don't, not near the full amount, but I think there's some staff debt and we collected a lot of that. But,
Yeah.
some of the families that have been out of the district for 10 years, that's really, I think that's what Bonnie's talking about
Yeah,
is
right.
realistically,
Yes.
can we ever collect that?
Right.
Really long
Yeah.
balance.
At the end, again, I don't have the actual detail, this would have got, working with INAC services, there was about $90-some thousand.
Oh, that much? Wow. So that's more than I thought.
And Bonnie, just to put that in perspective too, when I started 5 years ago, I think we were probably around 60,000.
Yes, yes.
Roughly.
Yep.
But that's also like a 500 individual cases.
Oh, exactly. If you look back, I got a list from INAC, if you look back, there's a few, it's probably a dozen or so, that are the higher, and most of them are just, here, you spread it over, 500 accounts, and it's, $5, $10 here and there.
And the collection costs alone, just eat up most of what you're gonna get.
Yeah, and collection costs, again, too, have to be borne by Fund 2, or Fund 1, they can't come out of food service. So it's just one of those things that we're encouraging the district or the finance committee or somebody to look at, because we just know with the landscape that's right now with the subsidized food service, that the collections every year goes on. And if you remember right, in 2020, 21, there was this, everybody kind of laid off. They said, you don't go after collections during that COVID time, which just really then hampered that likelihood of collection. So just looking at the food service receivables, comp time tracking too, we're really encouraging, we've talked about that point in the past. Right now your comp time is being tracked outside of your business. You've got, and it's traditionally been done like that because most of that comp time is going to come in that particular department. But we encourage that comp time tracking should be brought up and tracked specifically within their payroll. They can still do what they're doing, but it should be running through payroll and kept up in the office.
And the system allows us to do that?
Yes, yes.
And yeah, Bonnie, not to interrupt you, but we've already had a conversation where we thought Kathy in payroll and possibly Jamie would help her with tracking comp time in the office instead of down at the garage.
Yeah, and typically down in the garage, that's where most of it's going to come from. So they're tracking the time and things like that, but from an audit perspective and the recognition of what comp time is out there, it's really a compensation time that needs to be tracked formally through your accounting.
Why does it come from the garage?
Just because that's where most of the employees that get comp time work. I mean,
Out of the garage, they're the
Yeah.
custodians
right,
and the.
like teachers aren't usually at
Oh.
any comp time. It's gonna be if somebody works some overtime and they opt for comp time rather than
Rather than
the
getting
pay.
paid?
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
yeah. So it's mostly custodians and
Yeah.
maintenance stuff.
So is it kind of on your honor right now?
No, it's not an honor, it's just that they keep track of it in their office, which is fine, but I think what, Bonnie, correct me, but we just want it all in our leave system.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because it would be part of your liability at year end.
Exactly. Yeah, and it is part of the liability, that's how it kind of comes up where there, it's not on your honor system that they actually, they track, here's employee A, you know, here's how much comp time they had at the beginning of the year, here's how much they've earned, here's what they've used, you know, when they've used it, here's the ending balance. We get that ending balance and it is factored into the accruals when we talk about what, you know, what the district owes those employees. But what we're just saying is that function, they can still do that function, but it should be brought up and kept also records up in your payroll, and that it should be reflected through that system.
So, is that a district policy of ours that our custodians can do comp time stuff, or is that?
It's actually,
Bonnie, can I jump
Contract.
in?
it's in the,
Yeah.
Oh, it's in
Our comp time is contractual.
Yep.
And we do an excellent job on limiting overtime and comp time. And we truly do because we're fully staffed, right? We have a full custodial maintenance staff. If
Yeah.
we're in a district that was struggling with filling those positions, that's where your comp time increases, that's where your overtime increases. But we're really doing really well for our size.
yeah.
And I would suspect that Tyler must sign off before a
Yes.
person
He does.
just says,
Yes,
hey, I'm
he
gonna,
does.
I'm gonna work
Yes.
overtime, comp
Yeah.
time, whatever.
Yeah, let me back up and be very clear. The process is being tracked. You have the tracking, the approval
Okay.
process, the
Yeah.
use of it, all of that is
Yeah.
appropriate. All we're saying is that, you know, that can be done in that department, but those records should also then be formally up in your payroll, because that's the formal
Yeah.
recognition of that.
Oh, that's
So,
all you're saying?
Yes, that's
Okay.
all we're saying.
Okay.
Definitely the comp time tracking is there. And we're not talking a lot of, I don't have the actual dollars, but, you know, it's not significant for the district as a whole, but it's just, it should be one of those things that should be out
That
there.
should be out there.
Yeah, that's just the
Okay, I
point I
get
want to
that.
make sure that.
So the where we're tracking, I wanna go back to contracting. Sounds like we're doing it, but are we asking each individual who goes out and get those bids to retain it, to
Okay.
retain those bids or quotes? I mean, like, my question is, just for records retention and retrieval, should those be attached to a purchase order or whatever? So the official quote or the records are retained in the business office. So if employee A leaves, that those records are still officially retained.
Yeah. So Kim's getting at that last point with the quote documentation. So one of the things is when we do Minnesota legal compliance, we're required as auditors to come in and look at the district's contracting and compliance with contracting and bid. You know, from 0 to 25,000, it's open negotiations. A staff member can go out, assuming it's allowed in the budget, to do that and pretty much negotiate or get that. You know, from 25 to 175, there's a quote process that's required under statute that says an employee should have at least 2 quotes kept on file for at least 1 year, really through the audit process. Those quotes can be verbal. Those quotes can be, you know, just, they can call somebody up and say, hey, you know, what you can do. That meets statutory requirements, assuming there's the documentation of that. And so from an audit perspective, you know, anytime we have more written documentation onto it versus somebody saying, yes, I called such and things like that. That's what we're really getting at, is looking at that quote documentation. Now, I do have clients that'll say, okay, if you're gonna have 25 to 175 and we're not going out on public bids, because if it gets 175,000 or more, it's public bids, that means it's closed, you have to go out and advertise, you know, then it's a much more stringent thing. But that 25 to that 175 is, the quote process under Minnesota statutes. Now, the district can require more restrictive if you want to, but we're just saying that if you do that, it might not be a bad idea to say, if you've got something at that level, 25,000, to when the PO is put in or when the thing is, just to attach, and it doesn't
Just
have
print it
to
out.
come from that, it can be a verbal type thing, and just a note on the PO saying, hey, I contacted such and such and such and such, this is where they gave me. Or in this particular case, some of these come out, if you go to the state, has the state bid source, it can be one of them, that can be one of them, and you can decide to look at that. We're just saying, increase that documentation. I know Alex kind of we're scrambling during the audit, doing this thing, and then he's, having to call different staff people, and staff people are now in FY24 and thinking, what did we do in FY23? So it's just increasing that. There were no compliance issues, so be very clear about that. You were clear on the Minnesota, but it was just cool.
I think there were some purchases made that were, they were just fine, there's no issues.
Right,
It's
no
like-
issues.
And I just told some people, just print it out. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
Alex, is it safe to assume that when we do a purchase order, that we make note on there that says per quote and that quote number? I mean, I would, is that safe to assume?
yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely should be, yep.
Okay.
Yep, and I think we'll, like you said, not that anyone did anything wrong, but just to tighten it up a little bit. And
Well, and to make the audit process easier.
yes.
I mean, really.
That's
amazing.
That's not amazing, but, when we come to do an audit, part of the thing is when we do an audit, we look at different levels of evidence that is provided by the district. And written evidence is always more, a better form of evidence than just inquiry. When we come and do an audit, we're looking at inquiry, actual written documentation, we're getting confirmations from outside sources. We're taking all of those levels of evidentiary information coming in and assessing. When we just have verbal, that's
Yeah.
less of an evidentiary thing from that. So we have to do additional work to kind of support that. So we're just saying it's really a culmination of all of that.
So when we buy something under 25,000, we don't need any quotes?
Under Minnesota statutes, it's called open negotiations, which means that, now the district can have more restrictive, but it's just under Minnesota statutes, which means you don't have to go out on quotes or bids.
For under 25?
For under
So do
25.
we have a policy in our district at all, or no?
I think
We
you
just go by that?
follow state statutes on
We
to it.
follow state statutes, but I'll just a shout out to these, Joel and Tyler and Nathan, they do a really good job of getting quotes.
Yeah, oh, I know they do.
They do.
I'm just asking, really, we don't have to get quotes when it's under 25, right?
Not from a Minnesota statutory.
From
No.
that perspective,
It
yeah.
used to be, 10, and then there was a
Yeah.
time when it was even $1,000, and you
Yeah.
start looking at this day and age with cost, the Minnesota statutes just has lifted that and pretty much had said, from statutorily, you can always put it more restrictive. But again, I think Alex's point is well, that is one thing when we come in to do the district, and the district this size, we don't just deal with Alex, he's kind of the point person, but he's really good, whether it's, Nathan or Tyler or some of your other people that are there.
I just had to add something, for federal special grants that we use to pay for different equipment, I have to get I have to submit a prior approval letter to the state if anything's over $5,000.
Yeah.
Oh, so you have your own special,
I have to provide a letter signed by Superintendent Aldrich and
okay.
I have to include a quote, I have to include pictures of if it's something construction-wise, and then I send that in, and then I get approval, then I can proceed with it. If it's over
Okay, so that's federal.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that really takes that 5,000 that takes to that other reason why even that capitalization policy. And again, federal, like even food service, you can't go out, food service, you have everything, your contract with INAC has to be approved from MD. If you have any capital equipment that comes out of it, that has to be approved by MD. So there are so many checks and balances and oversight that occurs with school district financing. Sometimes the amount, and Nathan is right, whether it's special ed or if it's title, some of these, even with the federal funds, the budgeting process needed to be approved from MDE. So it's not just, you can just do what you want. Sometimes as a district you can expend it, but in order to get the federal funding or state funding sources, it has to have that additional.
One question, so between 25 and what, you said 175, you only need one written quote?
two, they minimum of two, well,
One can be a
recommend-
verbal.
yeah, they can be verbal, so
They
that
can both be
they
verbal?
both can be verbal at that point.
Um,
Yeah.
Is that kind of a little hole?
Yeah.
Well, it definitely widened it up. Now the quotes, generally we'd say written, evidentiary written is better. So you can go out and say, hey, it just means you don't have to go through that formal bidding process. Once you get over that and have to go through a formal closed bidding, that gets expensive because you're advertising. You've got to have a point in time when those bids come in, there's a bid
So
opening.
you do have to advertise between that 25 and 75?
No.
Or you just call up two car dealers and say, I need a quote on a whatever.
3 cars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. And they're really recommending you check with the Minnesota, they have,
Preferred bidding.
preferred, the state goes out and does some of this pre-bidding ahead of time with that. And so, one of the things is you call up and say, what would be a vehicle under that one? Call up the local, say, here's what we need onto the thing. Just document that you've got those two sources you've used. That meets the statutory limits to it.
Do we have the authority to type that up as a district?
You certainly can,
Because
yeah.
just for my brain, I'd like to see documentation that, yes, we did call XYZ dealer and got a verbal quote.
I caution you not to make it so restrictive that it becomes so onerous for the staff to do it type thing, but definitely even keeping from that 25 to 175 under the current statutes would just say, and that's exactly what we're recommending, is just if you call up and do the verbal quotes, write down who you spoke with, when you spoke to them, what you got with them, that's all you need.
There's also the service co-ops throughout the state, it's called CPC, Consolidated, or Cooperative Purchasing
Purchasing.
Consortium, and they take care of paperwork like that, and that's all going by state statute, whatever it states, so that helps too.
But that's why kind of back to the beginning when I brought it up, I'm not suggesting that, I think we're compliant. It's just to make the process more efficient at the end of the year, but also, we're stewards of public funds, right? To protect our employees, and if anybody ever called and said, hey, ISD 701, you just went out and bought a car at blah, 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 right? I would want Alex to be able to say, yep, and here's the quotes, we're being good stewards of public funds, and here's the two
Yeah,
quotes.
absolutely.
And be able to retrieve it in time.
And we probably are doing that,
Yeah,
my
for
is my
sure.
guess, if we're
Yeah.
doing something big like that.
But
But
that
it's a kind of a
process,
loophole.
but that process is exactly what we as auditors do. So when we're going to do the audit, we're identifying those expenditures over that dollar amount, specifically looking at it. And we are asking Alex, then where's the documentation? And we're just saying to make that a little bit smoother, where Alex could say, here it is, it's attached to the PO, or, somebody's got it and it's right there, and it's written, and then we don't, it's not that, okay, I think, this is when we did it, or it's just based on verbal.
Yeah.
It's just, as auditors, documentation, because we know one of the difficult points when Alex, I can see it sometimes, is that, we're under here looking at FY23. We're asking him about things that happened a year ago. He's in the middle of not only trying to answer that, he's in the depths of doing FY24 budget, looking ahead. It is very difficult.
Thinking
We're
about
human.
25, 26.
25, 27. It's very difficult to say, think in terms of somebody asked you, what did you buy 6 months ago?
Yeah.
We're just saying, write it down.
Yeah.
That follows up the question.
Bonnie, can I just add?
Yeah.
Bonnie, first of all, Alex is like a steel trap. If you ask him what he did 6 months ago, he knows. But the other thing I just want to be cautious about is that, these policies, when they were created, costs have gone up. I mean, if you just look in this room, when we put up the screen and did so I can connect with you remotely, I think the cost, was roughly around 60 grand just to do that piece. When we replaced the board tables and your chairs that you're sitting at, I think that was about 15,000. So when you talk about a $5,000 number, there isn't probably many expenditures that we have that are under $5,000. It's just the way it is. So I just want to be careful, this vendor, for instance, with the screens that Joel worked with, I mean, they were probably one of the only 2 vendors in the state that he felt comfortable working with. I mean, if we have to get multiple quotes, we might be going out of our region, just to get quotes, and that's going to drive our costs up also.
But, and that.
I'm not disagreeing with Bonnie, I'm not we encourage 2 quotes on everything. We're talking about a wellness event with staff again in the spring, and I encourage that team to make sure that they get multiple quotes from venues that, just to be transparent, that we're not, just seeking out one proprietor or one vendor on all of our expenses.
And the statutes even say when reasonable,
Right.
obtain to when reasonable. I mean, obviously, there's gonna be times when it's so specific that you can't, then it's just documented. That's really all it is.
Or if it's an emergency.
Or emergency,
whatever,
right,
you
there's
just
all
have to
kinds
do
of
it.
things. But again, be clear, these are just recommendations to look at for title. There was no citation in your Minnesota legal compliance about non-compliance with that, so. With documentation, and I think then that would just bring the last slide if there's any questions or
Mike Keegan
comments.
has something.
Yeah, Mike.
Okay, before you interrupt me again, wherever you are.
It's God's voice.
Yes. This is on a personal note for myself, and I don't want Alex to have hair that's taller than mine. Is there anything that we can do or for his office to help him? Being that we're sharing with Chisholm now, and we have, our district there, part of their district there. And is there anything that can be recommended on an audit side of what we can improve to make his life a little bit easier?
Well, that's a great question.
Thanks, Mike. Rick, do you want to explain that so it's coming from you, not me? What we talked about?
We might have lost him.
Dropped off.
No, so,
Scared him.
yeah. So, Rick and I have talked, on a personal level about just like that, we need more help, and he totally appreciates that and is supportive, and he thought after get through Christmas here, we could look at some kind of a job description and some kind of a posting.
An assistant or something.
Yeah, like a business office assistant or like a district controller or something along those lines.
And I think another thing to tail off directly to Mike's question too, something that could be done, which we've kind of touched on, that wouldn't involve at the basic core level, is also to do some additional education with all the staff who are in charge of coding, to kind of get them up to speed, to kind of like, here's where UFARS is and why it's important. There are people in the districts, Nathan is, I just look at him because he's sitting there and he gets a lot of my questions during the thing, but he's very aware of the need because UFARS has to agree with, well, it used to be, they're CERTs and now they've changed it again. And, so some are very aware of the coding structure, but there's a large majority that it's not part of their job to do. They get a supply thing, they code it, and here's where we coded before. So that would be, the district could spend a little, maybe some additional training, whether it's one-on-one or something like that, that those
Well,
kids
this is,
are doing.
to me, it's something that, being that we are sharing with Chisholm, that the expense involved in upgrading or re-educating some of the people on what has to be done is something that can be shared between the two districts.
Yep, and not speaking for anybody, but we already had some conversations, and I think we have that support from Chisholm as well too. So.
Oh, God.
And I think another thing to keep in mind, I agree with training, but I think we have staff that come and go often, so maybe even some sort of, I don't know if we can do like a one-page something, so when a new employee is onboarded, if it happens to be in the middle of training cycles, that person, if they're going to be purchasing, has an awareness.
Director Egan, I apologize if I've been interrupting you, that is not on purpose.
That's all right, I took your donut.
We thought you dropped off on purpose.
You can have it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, my computer timed out here again, or as soon as you asked your question. But I do want to say that, I think I heard Alex say, that we have talked with Superintendent Morrison and Chisholm, and Alex is working on a job description. They would like to have more of a boots on the ground person in the district a couple of days a week, somebody to answer their questions, and that has the potential to take some of the workload off Alex, and then also has the potential to be a support for Alex, and we would work within the confines of our current agreement or at least try to stay within the confines of that current agreement without raising their costs or expenditures. So we're working on that right now, and it would be something we'd bring back to the board here probably right after the new year.
Yep, exactly. I appreciate that, Director Egan, very much, but we talked with Bonnie, I've talked with Rick, and we think we have an idea where to go here. It's just, we just haven't had the time until after Christmas probably. So.
It's unique, so I want to again thank Alex. 3.5 months of dealing with multiple emails and telephone calls for me during the day probably are not always the best, but again, it's a process. You know, you don't pull together an 80-page report with just pushing a couple numbers, so and it takes a lot of staff from not only Alex's office, but across the district. You know, the response from everybody's office has been good to the whole thing. But it is just, it's an awful undertaking, especially when the audit occurs the same time budgets and everything else is coming. It's just a pretty strong workload for one or two individuals like that.
Are you done?
You mean with the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, because
Questions or comments?
Okay, well, I have an overall question. I'm really concerned about our booster clubs
Mhm.
and their accounting of their money.
Okay. Mhm.
Is there anything as a district we can do to get a better hold of that? I've heard of booster clubs, you know, spending down to almost nothing. And like, where did the money go? Is it our business? It feels like it should be our business. They're tied so closely to our district. Is there anything we can do to get a better handle on booster clubs?
Actually, there is, and
There
your
is,
question,
okay.
your question is not unique.
Okay.
And actually within MDE and the UFARs themselves, there is some good information, and I can certainly forward that on to Alex, and he can forward it on to you. So booster clubs provide a unique relationship with school districts, because booster clubs by their nature are separate, independent, most of the time not-for-profit groups. They've got their own 501c3, they have their own thing out there, their board of directors, they are separate. But booster clubs by their nature often are so closely related to the schools because they're assisting, and that's why they're done. You know, legally there is no authority for the school district to reach into that booster club to try to take over controls or whatever. So even MD or through the UFAR's manual has some description on it. They talk about it is really important for the school district to create a positive and open communication with these booster clubs.
Okay.
Oftentimes inviting the booster clubs, if they're going to, especially if they're going to use the name Hibbing or school district or somehow being attached, because that is you.
Right.
You certainly do not want these booster clubs going out there, and they should not be going out there and using this, you know, pretending that they're, I shouldn't say pretend, but maybe alluding or people being confused. It's not part of the school.
And I think people think they're part of the school.
Because remember, the school also has student activity funds. Those
Right.
student activity funds are under board control.
Yep.
You have things like close-up, you have all those type of things. So they're doing
Yep.
fundraising. That is under your control. Those type of fundraisers
Right.
should be approved from the board, those type of things.
Yeah.
These booster clubs are not. So it really is to get a list of all the booster clubs, you know, talk with your athletic department, talk with your different ones, who's out there doing these. And just have a conversation saying, okay, we just want to know who the booster clubs are, who are the officers, you know, and have some like, what are you doing? If you're going to do a fundraiser, let the school know. It's not like you have to approve it, you don't have any authority to do it. But it's that open communication.
Right, but,
But
you know,
the
I'm
school
thinking
could
like,
put out a disclaimer saying
Well-
that not associated with.
we could, but they are
It depends on the
associated with us.
circumstance.
Yeah, you know, I think, and again, I can forward on some information onto it because it is a discussion that comes because it is, inherently you have no authority unless they're using ISD 701 and telling people they're doing it in
Well,
that, they can't.
okay, they're calling themselves the Hibbing whatever sport booster club, okay?
Yeah, that's
They're
fine.
maybe going out there saying, we need money, please contribute to us for busing costs.
Okay,
Well, that makes the public think the district doesn't even fund their busing,
yeah,
but we do.
yeah,
You know.
and that's,
And that's really a bad reflection on the district.
yeah, and that's really where
So-
this conversation comes from, MDAs, to have that conversation with that booster club saying, you need each other. You know, there's this mutual relationship that comes out to the whole thing. And so it's important to recognize what the, what those booster clubs are doing are very important work to help support districts' operations. So for instance, a lot of those booster clubs might be fundraising because they want to upgrade transportation.
That's what I mean,
you know.
but it makes it look like we don't even fund their busing.
Well, and that's
They
part
say
of,
busing.
yeah. And it's just a communication thing, but I've got some information I can forward on. It's a very, it just comes back to open communication and kind of like who's doing what onto the whole thing. But you don't really, unless they're out there saying, ISD 701. I mean, naturally, they're going to use
Well,
Hibbing
they say
such and
Hibbing.
such.
Or they say blue jacket,
Yeah.
whatever.
That's
Yeah.
common, that's common. And again, it's public awareness, and I get it, the public isn't always, they see those groups as part of the district.
Well, and then
that's-
if they think that, where's this money in such and such a club?
Yeah,
They come to us and say, you need to do something about this booster club, this money's missing or whatever.
yeah, and
And
that's,
what do we do?
as a school board, it's just making sure that they understand that that is a separate not-for-profit or a separate group, and that
So we
they're,
just tell people it's none of our business?
well,
I mean,
Hey, Director Nyberg, if I could just, I know that athletic or activities director Turner sent out a message about an activities committee, and I think he has invited a couple of board members to also be a part of that. I think that's one of his overarching goals here, is to get some direction on booster clubs, maybe set up a subcommittee of that group that works with booster clubs, just to get more communication.
yeah.
Oh, good.
And we'd also talked about, if we're receiving funds from the booster clubs, maybe we need a more detailed expense report from them, just tracking their ins and outs. And that, if we're gonna take funds from these organizations, that's not an unrealistic ask to give us some financial statements on top of that. So that's something Keith is working on, and hopefully we'll have a couple board members that are a part of it too.
Well, and you know what, and I completely agree with Kathy. And maybe, as part of it, back in the day, 10 or 15 years ago, as booster clubs, we were required to turn in a financial statement, because I think the school district at that time was giving the different groups, for example, track, a couple $1,000s or whatever that number was a year. And in order to get that allocation, you had to have a financial statement turned in.
Like
Depending-
once a year or something?
Yeah, at the end of the season, I think.
Okay.
But that might be something too, like, do we expect our activities director to have that expertise? Maybe it's part of this new position. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think we need to look at that, and then kind of leveraging off of that into the student activity, which is under our privy. I'm assuming that a big piece of the last management letter comment was cash collection points. I think that's another topic that the finance committee, and only because that's been a management letter comment since I've been on the board. And we need to do what we can. Technology's changed. We need to protect our employees. We need to be aware, so when people are out in the community fundraising or selling candy bars to go on the Spanish trip, like, we know what's going on. And I think that's another good conversation.
Can someone clarify with the what's included in the student activity fund that is part of our district?
Yeah. So the student activity funds are those funds that are specifically under board control. They used to, a few years ago, there used to be a separate report in here, and then the standards changed and said, no, they're under board control. In other words, it's things like flow stuff. There's actually a separate fund.
Separate.
The district tracks has a fund 11, fund 11 on the thing, where it's tracked with each individual board-approved activity, student activity, their money coming in and money coming out. It's tracked specifically in UFARs. There's a restricted fund balance for them. It's things like close-up. It's some of those that it used to have. Some of the things like, I'm just using, I don't have it in front of me, but, boys basketball or,
But it's
whatever.
not that anymore?
But, so what happened is, unless student activities mean it's a board-sanctioned event that happens typically on school site after hours, not for credit,
Yeah.
those type of things, and it has to have a current student activity. It's driven by the students. They have an advisor, but it's
Okay.
the students do it.
So
So-
math team.
Yeah, now.
Okay, but
Knowledgeable.
none of the sports.
Typically with the sports, what we saw when those transition went through, because the sports, typically they don't have an activity where the students are driving an activity. It's done through sports, which is then, either under the board control for the sports cost, or booster clubs, will
Okay.
take over. So a lot of those funds that used to maybe be in those student activity funds at that point dried up, and those activities that used to be done with that really went out to these
To the
formally,
booster
the
clubs.
booster clubs. So
Okay.
most of the time with the sports,
Yeah.
those have separate booster clubs. Knowledge Bowl doesn't have a separate booster club, or
But if
things like
they
that.
did,
If they did,
then
and
they
it was,
would be taken out of the student activity?
it could potentially be done because the student activity fund says it's under board control, it's driven by students. So every year when we come in and look at those funds, I have to get a current list of who are the students. When those invoices are being done, a student signature is required on it
Oh,
with an advisor approval onto it. That's the whole nature of student activity funds. This district, just to give you a perspective, that the student activity funds have diminished over the years.
Yeah.
As some of those, there's just a few, you have totally in your student activities, there's 43,000, about 44,000 of funds held for those things. So it's definitely not significant overall. Most of that activity has now gone out to booster clubs.
yeah.
And that's where.
Bonnie, can I add to that quickly? I just want to say, Kathy, I think where that's changed is that if you run any funding through a student activity account, our process to receive funds or receive reimbursement or get something paid is much more stringent than what the booster clubs, it's a group of parents or they might have a committee. What I like about student activity accounts is if you're really gonna use that process and use it correctly, it should be student driven,
That's exactly.
right? It's team driven. When I was a coach and I had an activity account for the track teams that I coached, I would sit down with my team and say, we've got these dollars, what do we want to do? And it took student input. And then like Bonnie's saying, it takes a student signature to sign up that we agree that this is a good use of these funds. So I really like that because it gets the students involved. And to manage that, I think on Alex's side, if all of our booster clubs came back into student activity accounts, the management side of that is overwhelming. So we got to be cautious about that, but I think we need to find a way to get a little bit more input and a little bit more control over how those funds are raised and how they're spent.
Yeah, I mean, you could, there has been some talk about combining booster clubs into one Hibbing Blue Jacket Booster Club. And then would that maybe be part of the student activity fund? Or it still wouldn't?
Yeah, no, not, I mean, if it's, again, a part of the thing is when you look at the student activity fund currently under its board action,
Yeah.
board control.
Okay.
So it's things like, drama club or prom is a good example. That's
Oh,
probably
prom,
one
okay,
that prom is probably one of the more prominent ones. Or
Yeah.
the student council prom and the graduation, that sort of thing. Prom is driven by students, they have an advisor.
Can
but
they do a
it's-
fundraiser?
Yes,
And it
student,
can still be part of the,
and they do,
they do
if-
fundraisers, but they don't have a booster club.
Right, I
Okay.
mean, prom doesn't have a booster club, so it's a board sanctioned prom activity. It's held generally after school, it's not for school credit.
Right.
It's driven by the students, they determine what they're gonna do. Now, obviously, they have an advisor to kind of advise and do, it's meant to teach kids to manage funds, to know that sort of thing. But the other important thing is, if it's a board-restricted student activity fund, it's very clear, again, UFARs and MDE have specific things on what they can be expended on.
Okay.
The kids can't just go out and throw, like certain things, they can't, do things. Booster clubs are governed by not-for-profit standards and governed by a board. They are charged and can do a lot more things
Yeah.
out of the booster club than you can. Because the other important thing is if it's brought within the student activity fund, it goes through the same receiving and disbursement process through the district. So it's much more controlled,
Yeah.
much more.
So is a big piece of our student activity fund balance the golf outing?
No, the golf outing is, I want to say there could be a piece of that. Part of the golf outing is over at Fund 31. Remember that 31 we talked about before? And that a sign that was kind of on these fringes. I'd have to go back and look at that schedule to see if there's anything sitting for the golf outing with the thing. I believe that's
I
in
think
Fund
it's
31.
31.
Yeah. 31.
But it's under school control.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That is, and that's that Fund 31 that are on the, it's not really a student activity fund, but it's kind of set aside over here, it's kind of assigned. Not a booster club, but it's kind of, your question is very good, and it's not something that you've only asked the question. It's been enough out there that I can send some information.
That'd be great.
Very good. Well, thank you and good job.
I just say one thing, Mr. Chair. So our finance committee is going to meet again after Christmas here in January, and we're talking about some plans, and we'll bring those back to the full board. I mean, shortly after the new year is kind of the plan here and going forward. So just to let you know that we are working on it. We did meet, and we plan to meet more frequently as we go forward here. And then also just shout out to Sterls. They worked so hard, and I know there were some nights in November that we were on the phone at 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just thank you to them
Yeah.
for everything they did for us. They worked very hard for us. So.
Okay, before we let Bonnie go, I'd like to go to item 6A, motion to approve the fiscal year 2023 audit financial report. Moved by Director Polter, supported by Director Egan. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Alex, to Rick, to his staff, to all of our administrators and folks that were affected by the audit. And I know, you know what, we hear that there's auditors, you know, they come and go, right? Like they can be in and out in a week. But in terms of the service and the quality of the service and the product that they provide, and I can tell you, I was one, when I got on the board, I'm like, you're using the same auditor for how many decades? You know, like, there's a risk, right? There's a
Yes.
risk. But I think in this case, the benefit far outweighs the risk, and the knowledge that Bonnie and Jeff have of this district is unbelievable. So thank you
Yeah,
to
I second
everybody.
that. Thank you so much.
Well, and then she also forgot the board of directors. Get a little credit.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, Chair Berklich, is there, could I, separate from the audit, could I share a couple of discussion items with the board before we adjourn today?
Jeff, you can go if you
They don't require a motion, do they?
They do not, no, it's more just information.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, and if Bonnie, if you, I want to say thank you to you too, Bonnie, but if you know, if you would like to go on with your day, you certainly can.
You're dismissed. Well, how long are you going to be, Rick?
Well, I guess I don't know. I guess I don't know. I want to share with the board, some of the ideas that our administrative team is working on, and, we met, our principals and administrators met yesterday with some staff on some of these ideas, and I just want to make sure that the board is aware, and just in case you get questions. So if you want to stick around, Bonnie, you certainly can. I'll just shoot. Okay.
It might be helpful.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. Just a couple of things I want to make the board aware of, and Alex, you please jump in if I'm saying something incorrectly. But one thing I want you to be aware of is, you know, we're concerned about our transportation costs. Now, Bonnie didn't spend a lot of time on that, but it's a concern for us. I mean, we're overspent in transportation. This is a trend that's been going on for quite a few years, and we need to find a way to get a handle on it. So what we plan to do, and I just want to share this so it's out there, and also for, you know, HPAD in our public meeting, is that we will be looking to rebid our busing contract work, and we are going to streamline and narrow the bidding process that we favor a one vendor approach to our busing contracts. The reason we favor a one vendor approach is currently we have two sets of statements that come in. They're different expenditures, they're different rates based on two different contracts. it's a very complicated process for Alex to really get a handle on our expenses, because they're coming from two different companies, and they're two different sets of expenses with the same expectation. So what we would like to do is we would like to rebid and put that out and really try to settle in on one vendor. So that might mean that Shubat and Tactran might have to work together on a bid rather than two separate bids. Or we might look at some outside bidding. We're hoping that we would get some other competitive bids for transportation contracts. So I want to share that with you. Do you have any questions on that, or anything Alex and I can answer? We'll share more as we move forward, but we're heading in that direction.
Are there other local vendors, Rick?
Well, we spoke yesterday to Tom Watson, and Tom has been helping us the last couple of years with our transportation contracts, and that's really his expertise, is transportation. So he feels that there are vendors in the area and really outside of the area that might be interested in coming in and bidding our work. So we'll see what we get. But we are going to narrow that bid to stay within our transportation budget. And that's where we're getting in trouble now, is that we bid work, we bid routes, and we're spending more than we're taking in revenue. And yes, that's probably will continue just with some of our activity runs, that we are going to be overspent, but we're overspent by too much. We need to reel those costs back in. So that's one that we'll be working on here in the near future after the new year. The other thing I wanted to share with you is I sent an email maybe 2 days ago, after our administrative meeting and after the finance committee meeting, about some plans going forward with some restructuring of our elementaries. And I'm going to share that email that I shared with the board with the full staff today, with a little bit of explanation in the beginning, because I want them to see the same thing that you're seeing, and the same thing that came out of our finance committee, and the same thing that came out of an admin meeting. So what we're looking to do is reconfigure the alignment of our elementary buildings. So we would have all students at the Washington would be pre-K1 at the Early Learning Center Washington. So that would mean first and second graders from the Greenhaven would move to the Washington. And then we would have, the Greenhaven would be a 2-3 building. And then the Lincoln would be a 4-7 building. And what we're hoping to do is not only streamline our services and streamline our expenses, we're also trying to create additional collaboration amongst our staffs, and having all the kindergarten teachers under one roof, having the first grade teachers under one roof. We've always kind of had this, I'm a Washington, I'm a Greenhaven, I'm a Wolf, I'm a whatever it might be, a little bit of rivalry. So we're hoping to bring that together, and that will just streamline our ability to train staff and for staff to work collaboratively. And that's going to become more and more important as we move forward with the READ Act and all the requirements that we have to train on the READ Act. So I wanted to get that out there. I did receive a ton of comments from the board when I sent that email out, so I'm hoping you all received that and understand that. But staff were made aware yesterday that that's our plan, and then we also, I'll send that email to staff today, the same email that I shared with you, with a little more explanation in the beginning of where we're headed. The last thing I wanted to say is, as a result of the staff meetings that happened yesterday, I had a number of staff members reach out to me that are close to retirement, that are wondering if the district would consider any type of retirement incentive for our employees if they were to retire early. And if that's something that is allowable in state statute, so if that's something that you would like me to pursue, I would come with some plans on if it's feasible. And again, if it makes sense for us that we could potentially give someone an incentive to retire, and then we could replace that position with somebody that's not as many years of experience, or potentially not at that same level on the salary schedule, we can save some revenue. And we could potentially save some money if there was early retirements and an incentive paid, that position might not need to be replaced at all, depending on how it fits in our plan, so. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I thought maybe you froze and I was just talking here again, because you guys are very quiet. Does that make sense where we're headed here?
What's the time limit we're looking at for the realignment? What's the schedule there?
Well, it's a very tall order, like I said in our email, but we are looking to put this in place to be ready fall of '24.
Is, the Lincoln, we're trying obviously to get closer to a middle school concept.
Exactly.
I'm thinking, but, I mean, to me, 4 should be with 2 and 3. 4 to me doesn't fit into middle school. But, you know, maybe, was there any talk of moving Boys and Girls Club from the Greenhaven to the Lincoln? And putting grade 4 at the Greenhaven?
Well, great, so 2 grades is probably all that will fit
At the
in the
Greenhaven?
Washington. Yeah, in Greenhaven and the Washington, yes.
2 grades
Yeah,
at the Greenhaven?
yeah, we need roughly 16 classrooms.
But there's
or-
3 grades now at the Greenhaven. Oh, but there'd be all, yeah, the whole town.
But they're all cut in half, yeah, it's only
Yeah.
half of the total enrollment, yes, so.
Grade 16.
I wish that we didn't
Roughly.
I wish we didn't have to put 4 with the middle school, that's all. But
Well,
if we do,
what-
then that's fine.
Well, and what Derek is looking to do is he's looking in the alignment of the building and how the building is set up, he's looking to create a middle school wing where we
Okay.
try to separate those younger students as much as possible from the older students. And then the philosophy of this wing would be a middle school philosophy. It would have a different look and a different feel than a regular elementary, and it would look different than a high school. So I think it has when we had talked about our strategic plan going back 4.5 years ago, this is gonna give us an opportunity to bring some of that to fruition and really treat those 6th and 7th grade students, give them a little bit more support and a little bit more help in a middle school model. And I do think that, we have a lot of parents out there that have anxiety over that switch from 6th to 7th grade, and I think this might help bridge that a little bit. But again, these are just kind of broad strokes. We'll give you a much more detailed plan here after the new year, but we just want to make sure that you understand this is where we're heading, and if there's concerns that we talk about them now.
I'm absolutely thrilled. I left our finance meeting, I felt as though, like having our administrative team, yourself, present this because it's something we've wanted to do for a long time, and being able to provide more services to our students because we've got specialists that are running between buildings, and even if each one could serve students, a couple more students, that's a huge win, and keeping our kids together, middle school concept. So, and all the potential cost savings that are, oh, by the way, we're better serving our students and it's more cost efficient, like that's huge. But my only question is, and maybe it's in the future, but if there's any way we could get grade 8 in that middle school, so our high school where you start earning credits towards graduation is 9 through 12. I know maybe we don't have the space, but like that would truly be a middle school, and in my opinion, a huge.
Middle schools have a lot of different definitions, whatever grade you want to call middle school, so there's no set,
I understand.
But I think it's between 5 and 8.
Yeah.
If we put
you can call it whatever you want.
Yeah, well, I
Or,
know,
I mean-
but it's grades 5 to 8, somewhere in there. Middle school.
Because,
Well, I've seen up 7th and 9th and
Right.
10th.
Oh, to 9th even? I
Yeah.
thought it was always to 8.
But
I
I
looked it
could-
up a long time with the MSBA, and
Yeah.
there's, whatever you
If
could
you
want
move
to
to
call it.
Lincoln, or move the 8 years to Lincoln, you'd be probably over 800 students in the building, where it's full at 750,
Yes.
according to Bob. So that would be a lot of kids.
what would be doing something with 4, right? But I just commend our staff for taking this on, being aggressive in a timeline, coming up with a creative thing that we've been talking about for how long? All the changes we've done in our district, this is huge, and
Yeah, this is huge and it's good.
And our
I
kids
mean,
will be in-
essentially, we're saying no more neighborhood schools too. So it's a big change. You know, it used to be you live by the Washington, you go to Washington. Greenhaven, you go to Greenhaven. This way, we're just saying, you're a kindergartner in Hibbing, you're going to the Washington, period. Doesn't matter where you live.
Well, no
And
matter,
I like that.
no matter what we do, if we do this and when we do it, and whatever grades we use, we need to promote it.
Yeah,
Because this will draw more students, hopefully, from
yeah,
other communities to come here.
yeah. I like it a lot. I'm a little concerned about the 4, but I know we can't do much about
I'm
it.
a little concerned about the transportation costs.
Right, that's gonna go up.
or is it gonna be less?
It's gonna go up?
Is it gonna go down, because you're gonna have fewer buses going through the neighborhoods, going to both schools?
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. What do you think, Alex?
I agree, I mean, we're still early in looking at this, I think we
Yeah.
need to do some more analysis, but I think there's some potential for
For
some
savings?
savings there, you know,
Yeah.
look at transportation, but maybe things like food service.
But it might be less walkers. I don't know how many walkers we have now. We don't really have many, I don't think, no?
I mean, I got a friend who lives across the street from the
You have to
Greenhaven
transport
school, and her daughter is scheduled to be on a bus,
Yeah,
even though it's literally across the street.
yeah. Carrie, how many walkers, did we have a big percentage of walkers, like at the Greenhaven?
No walkers K2.
We have to transport.
Oh, no walkers K2
But
at all.
that's our policy.
That's our district
Our
policy.
district policy.
Yes, that's our district policy.
Oh.
I think we can look at those kinds of things because,
Yeah,
now maybe you can open up walkers to the
Greenhaven,
Greenhaven.
yeah, right.
And, I mean, I think this is gonna reduce transportation costs because right now, we have so many unique situations where we're literally going to the same place for the Washington and the Greenhaven. And
Okay,
it can be a situation where, a kid started in first grade at one school or kindergarten at one school, then moved and transferred in first grade, and then we don't want to move them a second time, so we keep them
so you
in
keep
second
them,
grade,
yeah.
but we transport them when
Yeah.
they should be going to the other school.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think you're gonna see cost savings.
Yeah, and we can maybe really promote walking for the 2nd, 3rd grade. I don't know. And the Lincolns.
Well, keep working on that, Rick, and then as far as the incentives for retirement, put something together for the board to review.
Okay, I will, I just wanted to make sure that you wanted to go down that path, and I would not bring something to the board that fiscally didn't make sense, right? I mean, we're not gonna pay out more in incentives than we would have in savings, so anything I put together, I'll make sure that it has those restraints on it. Yeah, the other thing, just to think about on this reconfiguration too, is, initially when we were looking at transportation routes, another thing that we're playing with is that at least on paper, I see that if we could start dropping off students at our elementaries 20 minutes earlier than we currently do, we could save 6 daily routes in the district. So that's another thing, our teachers don't start until a certain time, but maybe we look at providing some type of morning drop-off supervision earlier in the building, and we've got the potential to save routes right there.
Well, and what about in the future if we went to elementary starting earlier and high school starting later? Does that save money for transportation?
It does, that's all contractual, our start and end times, and I want to have that conversation
Yeah,
with
I know
our
it-
bargaining groups.
Yeah, I know it is, but.
The other piece, this is getting down the road even further, but I would like to bring back to the board at some point if we can look at increasing the minutes in our day, if that's possible, to increase the minutes in our day. I would like to find some more collaborative time for our teachers, maybe to have PLC times be every other week instead of just once a month. And that's going to be important in our work that we do with Chisholm and in our work that we have to do collectively just to support the READ Act and all these other curriculum changes that are coming. So if I can make that work, that's something else I want to present to the board, is some additional collaborative time for the teachers.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Poulter has something to say to you.
Motion to adjourn?
Without objection, the meeting is adjourned. It's at 11:10, and thank everybody for showing up, and Happy holidays.